Hi again, it's Mr. Unright, back to talk a little bit about the Holocaust today. And you've done the reading in the textbook, so you know a lot about the facts. The textbook goes into what happened in the Holocaust and the anti-Semitic philosophy behind it. The details are staggering. 11 to 12 million people killed, 6 million of those Jews. An attempt at what we call genocide. Genocide is the murder of an entire group of people, an entire ethnic group. The Holocaust was clearly an attempt at genocide. But the question that we want to address today is not, was the Holocaust bad? Duh, the Holocaust was bad. Or even the numbers of it. But the question we want to address today is, how do you fix it? How do you punish people for this? Let's look at the reality here. The people who committed the Holocaust were not breaking any laws. It was not against the law in the country where they were to do what they did. You can't put somebody on trial for something that wasn't against the law when they committed the act. As you learned last year, it's called ex post facto. You can't go back and change the law later and then charge somebody with breaking it. But let's be honest. When wars happen, usually when the war is over, people try to forgive and forget. War is hell. Horrible things happen in war. That's the nature of war. But there was something more here. This was far beyond the nature of war. Moreover, the murder of those 11 or 12 million people had nothing to do with the war. That's something entirely separate from the war. It's a second war that the Germans were fighting. And so we have to look at, what can be done after the war is over to bring any kind of justice to the people who committed these acts. Which leads us to the question of who is at fault? And one of the questions I ask in your homework is, who's to blame for the Holocaust? You can lay it all on the doorstep of Hitler, I suppose, but the reality is Hitler didn't actually kill anybody himself. Or you could say the higher-ups in the Nazi party who issued the orders, or you could say the Nazis, or you could say the death camp operators. But the reality is an awful lot of people participated in this in one way or another, either by following orders that they probably knew better than to follow, or by looking the other way. If I do not stand up and say it's wrong to haul these people away, am I partially at fault when they get hauled away? We're looking at something that after the war came to be known as collective guilt. There's a lot of guilt to go around. This is a lot of people's fault. The German people in general, people in the countries that were taken over by the Germans, who collaborated with the Germans in rounding up Jews and undesirables like gypsies and Jehovah's Witnesses and helping to throw them into the concentration camps, and the people who didn't stop them. All have some level of guilt. The question, however, is how do you put somebody on trial? And in fact, an entirely new class of crime had to be defined in order to bring these people to justice. We defined, the international community, when I say we, I mean the world in general, defined a whole new class of crime. It's called crimes against humanity. And take a second and write that one down. Crimes against humanity. Crimes against humanity are things that everyone should know are wrong. You don't murder whole ethnic groups. You know that. You don't murder innocent children. You don't put people in camps to work themselves to death because of their religion. These are things that everyone should know. And if you're given an order to do these things, you should know better than to follow that order. There are some orders that shouldn't be followed. Because that becomes the defense of every person who was put on trial. I was just following orders. With this new class of crime defined, the people who committed the genocide of the Holocaust could be put on trial. And the trials were referred to as the Nuremberg trials. Nuremberg is a city in southern Germany that was sort of the seat of the power of the Nazis. Southern Germany is where the Nazi party had its greatest support. And when the war was over, Nuremberg became the city where Nazi officials were put on trial. Now, those that survived the war, of course, Hitler commits suicide in the closing days of the war, but there were a lot of the higher-ups in the German government who were captured, and they all claimed the same thing. I was just following orders. I was just following orders. But because of this new class of crime, we could put them on trial, and many of them received punishments. Some were executed, some were put in life in prison, some had, who were lower down the chain of command, were given different prison sentences. At a prison in Berlin, that prison was only for Holocaust perpetrators, and eventually it was emptied as they died off. The last one died in prison in the 1980s, and the prison was then closed permanently. In the meantime, there were a lot of people to put on trial. They weren't all in Nuremberg. The people who ran the death camps, the guards at the death camps, the commandants, the people who, were administrators who, every day, wrote down the number of people murdered and kept it on file. The Nazis were very good at keeping records of everything they did. And so there were a whole group of clerks and administrators and secretaries whose job it was to, organize and keep order to the mass murder that the Nazis were committing. And all of those people had to be put on trial. All of those people had some levels of guilt. The big question is the long-term picture. How does Germany look at itself after the fact? How do you, wake up in the morning and realize that your country committed these horrible atrocities? And it's a tough question. Germany has been struggling with this ever since the war. If you are a young person living in Germany today, it is, something that comes up in your school curriculum every single year. How did a civilized people allow themselves to be led to this extreme? And I don't think there are any quick and easy answers for that. It's not, you can't just say it's, because they were Germans and Germans are horrible people. We know they're not. We also know that, that everyday people all over Europe helped participate in this. And that genocide is not something that is only seen in the Germans. It's something that's happened all over the world. There's no easy answer here. Everyday people can be brought to commit horrible atrocities if the circumstances are right. I'm not saying everybody, because there were Germans who stood up and didn't do anything, the righteous Gentiles who helped the Jews, even within Germany. So it's not everybody, but normal people, normal everyday people who you would otherwise see as good people are partially to blame for this happening. And helped it happen. And others, to this day, believe that there are people who lived right near Auschwitz who swear they didn't know what was going on. They swear they didn't know that the plumes of smoke that were coming out of there with burning bodies of people who came in on the trains every day. The capacity of the human mind to look the other way and hide things that they don't want to know is rather remarkable. And honestly, I actually believe some of the people who say, yeah, I just didn't know. and it's because they didn't want to know. And for a lot of people, it's very easy to not know. Anyway, the things you need to get out of this: the concept of a genocide, the attempted murder of an entire ethnic group. The final solution that Hitler and his higher-ups created was the attempted genocide of the entire Jewish race in Europe. The concept of crimes against humanity, the idea that there are things that even if it's not against the law in your country, you should know better. The idea of the Nuremberg trials, and the concept of collective guilt, that everybody has some portion of the guilt. Those are the upshots of today's discussion. I hope this was helpful, and I hope it puts things into perspective for you. We're going to talk a little bit more about the closing days of the war and the total cost of the war in terms of people, and the long-term effects of the war in the next couple of days. We'll talk soon. Bye.